Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday night slate of college football DFS for Week 10 of the 2024 season. That's right, Saturday, November 2nd, 2024. We're going to be talking about the 7 p.m. Eastern time slate. Honestly, this is not the best Saturday of college football games in totality. I mean, really, you have a great matchup with Ohio State, Penn State at noon, but there's a lot of very mediocre games in between noon and the rest of the day. I think this night slate has a lot of the better games of the day. Definitely a lot of the more juicy matchups for fantasy purposes. So we're going to take a look at this 8-game night slate. We're going to break down all 8 games for you, tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as who you need to be targeting for your DFS lineups here on this Saturday night slate. Now, if you have not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That we can be with us when all of our new college football content drops. I have a video for the main slate already. Go check that out if you have not. And then we're going to be covering the main slate and the night slate every single week for the rest of the college football season, along with as much midweek content as I can possibly get to. I can't promise every single slate, but I get to what I can get to. I'm entering my busy season right now in terms of I'm currently coaching 2 high school sports. So I'll get to what I can get to, but no promises on everything. But if you're subscribed, you'll be able to be there when we do drop episodes, because in case y'all do not know, Maction season is coming up, and I am the number 1 fan of Maction. So I'm definitely going to be having a lot of college football content coming your way, and college basketball season starts on Monday. If you're subscribed to the channel, you can be with us for that season as well. All right, so let's go ahead and end the introduction there. We got 8 games to get to. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so game number 1 on this slate is one of the highest scoring. It is Arizona State heading to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State in the Pokes. Arizona State is 3.5-point favorites in this game with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-27 in favor of Arizona State. Remember, we always round off on the implied totals because you can't go out and score 0.25 of a point. So for this one, Arizona State is looking like a very stackable team. Sam Leavitt is their starting quarterback. He is back for this game. He missed the previous game with a rib injury, but apparently Jeff Sims did not do enough to win the job, which does not shock me because Jeff Sims has won and lost countless starting jobs over the years. Sam Leavitt's going to be back starting. He is I don't want to say a primary rushing quarterback, but he does score a decent bit of fantasy points with his legs. And Oklahoma State is just a great matchup. We have seen quarterbacks go off against them via the air with their legs. It's just a great matchup for opposing quarterbacks. Sam Leavitt, very reasonable salary at $7,100. Definitely a guy that I'm going to be getting in some of my lineups. But Arizona State's running back, Cam Scadaboo, is definitely going to be a guy that I'm going to be getting into my lineups. This is one of the most workhorsey backs on the slate with a total of 150 carries on the season. He's also probably the best from a fantasy scoring perspective on the season. After their week 1 win against Wyoming, in which he really only played a half, he has not scored under 23 fantasy points in a game. He also sees usage in the passing game, which gives him a really high floor. And Oklahoma State is just a putrid rushing defense. We've seen numerous running backs like Kansas State's DJ Giddens go off against them. And they currently give up the most rushing yards per game of any Power 4 conference team. So you've got a workhorse running back against a team that gives up a ton of rushing yards. Cam Scadaboo is in an absolutely smash spot. He is my absolute top running back play on this slate, regardless of price. If you were to ask me to just pick, hey, who scores the most points at running back this week, my money's on Cam Scadaboo. Now, at the wide receiver position for Arizona State, there's really only one guy you can really be interested in, and that's Jordan Tyson. They really don't target a whole lot of the wide receivers in a super consistent or high volume manner. Like I said, with Sam Leavitt being, a decent rushing quarterback, and Cam Scadaboo being such a great runner of the football, they don't really have a whole lot of passing volume to the wide receivers. Jordan Tyson soaks up a lot of them. He had 8 targets in their last game against Cincinnati, scored 19 points in that game without scoring a touchdown, which is impressive in my opinion. So to me, it's a very easy, very clear big 3 stack of Leavitt, Scadaboo, and Tyson. You can mix and match between them. I think you can play any of them as one-offs. I think you can stack all 3 of them. Those are the guys you want for this Arizona State offense. With them implied to score 30 points, and with them being so concentrated around such few players, this is a great opportunity to stack a few of these players. Now, on the Oklahoma State side, don't forget about them. Alan Bowman, who is about my age, and I am turning 30 in 23 days as I record this. Alan Bowman is a guy who is he's not been great this season, but the stats haven't been bad because he gets a ton of passing volume. Oklahoma State plays at a fast tempo. They play at a high passing rate, and he gets a lot of volume, and he gets opportunities to put up a lot of fantasy points. If you think this game turns into a shootout, which Vegas thinks there's a possibility with a total of 56.5, then there's a chance that Alan Bowman could end up coming through in DFS. I don't mind him as a play. I definitely think with his absolute lack of mobility because he's an old man, I think you want to stack him with 1 or 2 pass catchers from his Oklahoma State side. Now, with Oklahoma State, everything usually revolves around Ollie Gordon, but he has not been very successful this year because the offensive line has just been bad. They just haven't given him any room to run. Well, the last 2 games, they started looking better. 36 fantasy points against BYU, 24 fantasy points against Baylor. We're starting to see that old Ollie Gordon again. However, left the game against Baylor a little early with a knee injury. We don't really know much about his status as of my recording this. If he plays, he's a great play. If he doesn't play, obviously, you're going to see, some form of usage between the other running backs. Sesi Valahai, I hope I'm saying that correctly, ended that game against Baylor with 5 carries. Trent Howland only got 1 carry in that game against Baylor. And then Fields Jr. got 5 carries in that game after getting 8 against BYU. My money would be on Fields Jr., but I think they're probably going to go with Rodney Fields Jr., that is. I didn't have the first name on hand. I do think they're going to go of a bit of committee approach if Ollie Gordon is out. So I don't think necessarily that instantly they become top running back plays if Ollie Gordon is out. I think they become decent salary relief, but with a committee and with a high passing volume that Oklahoma State's going to have, they're not just instant start, put them in every lineup type of guys. But like I said, I think it'll be a committee between Valahai, Howland, and Fields. My money would be on Fields to have the best game. At the wide receiver position, Oklahoma State is super condensed. They really only play 4 guys. Brennan Presley is the slot that sees just a ton of targets, 17 of them against Baylor, caught 15 of them, which is just an insane number. He's obviously a guy that's just an easy click. You can play him, independent in game flow. If you think this game is a shootout, if you think this game is a blowout, I think either way, Brendan Presley is going to get his, and he's going to get a ton of volume. I think he's a really good play at the wide receiver position. Deshaun Stribling is more of a big play guy. Has been kind of quiet recently as they've kind of been shuffling in and out of Alan Bowman and Garrett Rangel at quarterback. But he creates big plays, and it would not shock me to see him have a few here, especially if this game turns into a shootout. Rashad Owens is more of a possession type of guy. Just doesn't, with Presley eating a ton of volume and Stribling creating the big plays, there's just not a whole lot of fantasy scoring there for Owens. He consistently plays almost every down, but just doesn't get enough work to turn it into fantasy goodness a lot of times. And then Taylor Shattertron is the other guy that plays a lot, but he's just not really seeing any consistent volume. 0 catches last week against Baylor. Game number 2, we've got Texas A&M taking on South Carolina. Texas A&M is currently 3-point favorites with a game total of 43.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 23-20 in favor of Texas A&M. And I got to say, with Texas A&M, they haven't named a starting quarterback yet, which is shocking because if you watch the LSU game, which I did, Marcel Reed clearly outplayed Connor Weigman. If you watched A&M this entire season, which I have, Marcel Reed has clearly outplayed Connor Weigman. I don't know why they're not pulling the trigger and naming Reed the starter. If Marcel Reed was for certain the starter, he would be an absolute smash play on DraftKings. So if you are willing to kind of make your lineups late and wait out and see if we get official news on if it's Reed or Weigman, or if you are willing to just set your money on fire if Weigman ends up starting, I think Reed is a great play if you can convince yourself that he's the starter and put him in your lineups. I think he's just a great play. You look at the games he started, 29, 24, 21, 27 fantasy points. He's priced at $6,200. So he's been over 4x salary in 3 of the 4 games that he started. That's really, really good. He's a dual threat. He creates a lot with his legs. That gives him a ton of upside. I think he's great if he's starting. I have no interest in Weigman if he's starting. At the running back spot, Le'Veon Moss, I think you can play no matter who's starting. We've seen him have a lot of success, especially in recent games, 40, 20, and 26 DraftKings points in his last 3 games, 7 total touchdowns in his last 3 games. When they are getting in the red zone, the Aggies are running the football, and that makes Le'Veon Moss absolutely in play, in my opinion. $6,200 is not the best price tag for him. I think he's appropriately priced. There are backs in his price range that I would rather play than him, though, but I do think that he's a pretty good play. At the wide receiver spot, Noah Thomas is the wide receiver 1 for this Texas A&M team. He did connect with Marcel Reed on a bomb against LSU, caught it for 54 yards, did not break free and score. Here's the issue, is that if Marcel Reed is the starter, there's going to be significantly lower passing volume for the entirety of Texas A&M's receivers. So Thomas, Cyrus Allen, Ja'Day Walker, they all play a lot of snaps. Jabri Barber's another one as well. But they're just not seeing enough volume to consistently score a lot of points. I think if I were to take a chance on any of them, it would be Thomas because he's a big play guy, or Jabari Barber because he was a wide receiver one at his previous school. We've seen him have some decent amount of volume in recent weeks. I think that $3,400 for Barber and $3,800 for Thomas, they're worth looks as just cheap dart throw wide receiver plays. On the South Carolina side, Lenora Sellers is $5,100, and I got to say, for a dual threat quarterback, that's a pretty good price. But then I remembered he's going up against Texas A&M's defense, which is, in my opinion, one of the 10 best defenses in the country. It's at least one of the 10 best that I've seen. Hey, and I'm saying that as a Texas fan. I can't stand Texas A&M. I think that the Yell leaders are one of the corniest things in college football. I do not like this team. I do not like this school. But it's all love. Like, I'm a Texas fan. I don't have any disrespect for them. I just don't like them personally. That's okay. But I got to admit, they're a really good defensive team. They are. That's what Mike Elko's got them doing. They're really talented. They fly around. Lenora Sellers, mobile quarterback at $5,100. Not a bad price tag for him, but not a good matchup. I think if you're looking for like a super low owned guy with a lot of upside, this would be your guy, but it's really hard to talk yourself into him having a good game against this Aggies defense. At the running back position, Rocket Sanders is back to being the workhorse after he was a little bit banged up. 31 carries combined in the last 2 games. But again, it's a tough matchup. So you're asking him to do a lot against that Texas A&M defense. At the wide receiver position, if you're playing Lenora Sellers, I probably wouldn't stack him at all. This wide receiver group is just not – I'm going to try to be polite here. They're just not an SEC caliber wide receiver group. You've got Nick Harbor, who is the best athlete on the field. He's insanely big, insanely fast, but they don't really use it. Like, they kind of just throw him a bomb every now and then and either catches it or he doesn't. You've got Gage Larvadain, who was great in the MAC, hasn't really done much at South Carolina. You've got Jared Brown, who's also really fast, really athletic. He's been banged up, hasn't done a whole lot. And then you've got Bennett Jr., just hasn't done a whole lot either. So really, I just have no interest in the South Carolina receiving room. If I'm playing Sellers or if I'm playing Sanders, they're one-off plays only, not really looking to stack. Next game up is the best game of the night, in my opinion. It is Louisville heading to Clemson. The ACC has some deceptively good games this week and through the rest of the season. This is one of them. I think Louisville, I think they get a little bit disrespected because they do have some losses, but they only really lose to good teams like Notre Dame and Miami. I think they're still a quality opponent, and I think that this is going to be a pretty solid game. Clemson is currently listed as 10-point favorites with a game total of 62.5 points. That is the second highest game on the slate, meaning the implied total is about 36-26 in favor of the Tigers. On the Louisville side, we've talked about Tyler Shuck ad nauseum here on this show. He's pretty good bet to get you 20 to 25 DraftKings points. If you want him to go over that, it's not super likely. He has 29 once this season. Every other game has been 25 or below. So against a Clemson defense that is getting better at a price tag of $7,500, I think he's a decent play. I think he's a decent game stack play. But expecting him to give you a performance that's going to win you a GPP, like expecting him to have that 40, 50 fantasy point performance, I don't think it's just – I just don't think it's happening. At the running back spot, Isaac Brown is still very reasonably priced for Louisville. He is turning into more and more of a workhorse as the weeks go by. I mean, just look at his last 5 games since he's really been the starter. 19, 24, 30, 18, 25. That's just really, really solid at a price tag of only $6,400. That's really reasonable. This Clemson run defense is pretty good, but I do think that with the amount of work that Brown is getting, with the game flow we're expecting of this being a game where Louisville's implied to score 26 points, I do like Brown as a play at $6,400. At the wide receiver spot, so we were thrown for a little bit of a loop when Colin Lacey announced his intent to redshirt this season. He'd been a guy that we had been targeting a lot because he was very cheap and he had a decent role in the offense. Now he's gone. And now Ja'Cory Brooks is just infinitely the wide receiver one. Against Boston College, 10 targets, caught 8 of them for 120 yards, 23 DraftKings points without a touchdown. I think he's an absolute smash play. Yes, this Clemson defense is good, better than Boston College for sure. But you think about this game environment, Louisville's going to be trailing. They're going to be throwing. They're going to be throwing often to Brooks, even at a price tag of $7,500. I think he's a great play. Chris Bell is going to be kind of the de facto wide receiver too. Didn't really come through against Boston College in that Friday night slate a week ago, but He's going to be the guy that's out there a ton. He's going to be getting some targets. He's worth a look. Amari Huggins-Bruce feels like he's been there forever. He operated as the wide receiver 2 against Boston College. 6 targets, 5 catches for 86 yards. I don't mind him at $3,500 either. And then Mark Redmond, the tight end, I don't mind him at $3,300. He's kind of more of a TD or bust type of play. But again, this is one of the highest game totals of the slate. Louisville's implied to score 26 points. If you're not looking to play Tyler Shuck, which I will not be, then Brown, Brooks, Bell, and Huggins-Bruce got to be in play for you, and they certainly will be for me. On the Clemson side, Kay Klubnik, in my opinion, I'm kind of going to have a controversial take here, y'all. Kay Klubnik is my favorite quarterback play on the slate. Yeah, he is. He just is. He's looked great in the last 2 months for Clemson. Ever since the Georgia game, he's been great. Hasn't had a game under 23.6 fantasy points, and that was against Florida State, where they basically just said, hey, we're not going to get beat deep. We're not going to get blown out in this game. You can take your underneath shots. You can run the ball, but we're not going to let you beat us deep, and forced him to check it down a lot and forced him to run a lot. And he still had 23.6 fantasy points. That's his lowest since the Georgia game. I think he's in a great spot against this Louisville defense that we have seen give up a ton of fantasy points to running quarterbacks. The game against Cam Ward did break the streak of quarterbacks rushing for 50 yards and or a touchdown against Louisville. But this is a great spot for Klubnik, especially a great spot when you consider his ability to run that he's added this season. Implied team total of 36 points is the highest on the slate. I think Klubnik's in an absolute smash spot. I also think Phil Maffa is in an absolute smash spot. Just because I like Klubnik doesn't mean that I have to dislike Maffa. They're implied to score 26 or 36 points. That's 5 touchdowns. If Klubnik gets you 3, Maffa gets you 2, both of them can hit value. And we've seen that multiple games this year, like the Wake game, where Maffa did score twice and did end up with 27 fantasy points. I think that can happen again in this one. He's an absolute workhorse running back who gets usage in the passing game. And when you have an offense that is super condensed with a quarterback and a running back, and they're implied to score a lot of points, you absolutely smash those situations because you know that they're going to be the ones scoring the touchdowns. Now, the problem with Clemson is that the receiving core could be thrown for a loop this week. Bryant Wesco is their super talented true freshman who may or may not be returning from injury this week. What we have seen in previous weeks is Antonio Williams emerge as a wide receiver 1, 18 DraftKings points in 3 straight games. We've seen Jake Brenningstoll be a super steady volume contributor at the tight end position. And we have seen TJ Moore and Tower Stellato emerge as secondary wide receiving options along with Antonio Williams. Moore and Stellato are still super, super cheap. But if Bryant Wesco is back and those guys are going to be playing lesser snaps, I don't know what that does to this amount of snaps and the amount of targets that those guys are going to be getting. I think you're just going to see a mess of a rotation. I think that Antonio Williams is still super reasonably priced, even if Wesco comes back. But if Wesco does come back, I think that totally throws the rest of the receiving room for a loop. I think it makes Wesco intriguing at $3,200 as a big play threat who could pay off his salary on one catch. But it's just definitely going to be an injury to monitor as we head into this slate. With this being one of the earlier kickoff games, I do think you can wait and see, especially considering all those wide receivers, Moore, Stellato, and Wesco, are all $3,400 or less. So if you put one of them in your lineup, you can late swap to one of the other ones. If you've got $200 of salary, you can make any combination of moves that you need to. But like I said, I think the one who is proof of any adjustments would be Antonio Williams at $5,500. All right, that does it for the first 3 games. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather and then break down the rest of them. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm trying to get all the show updates out there on Twitter. I'm also more than happy to answer any questions if you just reach out to me directly on there. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on audio as well as on the YouTube video for the Discord. If you want to join, it's entirely free, and it is a community of a bunch of really smart, really good people who are talking DFS in there all the time for all sports. I'm talking college football, NBA, NFL. When college basketball gets back, that one's going to be really popping. So if you want just people to talk DFS with, or just people to kind of just sweat the games out and watch together with, it's a great place to go. I cannot recommend it enough. And then lastly, I do write an article on my Patreon for every single college football DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as why they're my core plays. Now, granted, I can't just guarantee that you're just going to plug in those plays and win thousands of dollars. It's not that easy. Nothing is. And anybody who says it is lying to you. But I can guarantee that you can get some very well-researched, very well-thought-out thoughts from somebody who understands the X's and O's of college football and understands game theory and can get those thoughts to you and help you get better at college football DFS. All right, so let's go ahead and carry on with game number 4, which is going to be Wisconsin taking on Iowa. Do we even have to talk about this game? Yeah, I guess so. So Iowa's 3-point favorites with a game total of 41.5 points. Implied total is about 22-19 in favor of Iowa. On the Wisconsin side, I have no interest in Braden Lockett. Tawee Walker has turned into an utter workhorse since Chez Mellusi has left. He's been great, but just like he's going up against Iowa. It's one of the best defenses in the country, $6,300. I'd rather play somebody else. If you're looking for a low-owned guy who's going to get a ton of volume, and maybe he breaks off a long run and ends up with a good game, maybe that's Tawee Walker, but I just can't talk myself into it. At the wide receiver position, I do have a very minimal interest in Will Pauling. So we have seen teams dink and dunk their way up and down the field on Iowa so far this season. Iowa State did it with Jalen Noel. Washington did it with one of their guys. And so you've seen these volume-based wide receivers who don't necessarily have a high average depth of target, who don't necessarily have a bunch of big playability, end up with decent fantasy performances because they end up with a lot of catches and a decent amount of yards. Will Pauling could be that guy, and he's only 3,900. So I do actually have a little bit of interest in playing him, especially considering it's very possible that Wisconsin plays this game from behind most of the way. On the Iowa side, Brendan Sullivan, former Northwest Wildcat Brendan Sullivan, is now going to be the starting quarterback. It's only $4,800. He had 13 playing in relief of Cade McNamara in their last game against Northwestern. He has a little bit of rushing upside. I kind of don't think it's awful. And nobody's going to play him. $4,800. I think I might talk myself into playing him in one of my 20 lineups. But that's about it. Caleb Johnson is the engine that makes this Iowa offense go. He is a workhorse running back. He scores a ton of touchdowns. In fact, he has scored at least one touchdown in every game so far this season, averaging 2 per game, if we're being honest. He's great. He's been great. Wisconsin's not the best matchup in the world for runners. They're not the worst either. In terms of running backs on this slate, I would rather pay $600 down and get Cam Skattebo, but I think a lot of people agree with me on that as well. So I think that Caleb Johnson is probably going to be a decently low-owned play. And we know that he has a ton of upside. He's had multiple performances of 40 fantasy points so far this season. So I do think that he's a play with upside that's going to be decently low owned. Iowa wide receivers, I'm good. I'm moving on to the next game. Next up, we have USC taking on Washington in what is a classic Big Ten battle. We have this slate it's hilarious. We have the Big Ten game between Wisconsin and Iowa, and we have the Big Ten game between USC and Washington. That's just the juxtaposition of those two games being played at the same exact time in the same exact conference is wild because they're totally different styles. USC is currently 2.5-point favorites with a game total of 58.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-28 in favor of the Trojans. For the Trojans, Miller Moss is their quarterback. He has 0 rushing upside, but in the games where USC's offense gets humming, he can give you some good fantasy games. We have seen him have 33, 26, and 30 fantasy points in games so far this season. In all those games, USC scored 28 or more points. In all those games, he hit 300 yards. In all those games, he threw for multiple touchdowns. The way this game sets up as a 31-28 game, he could absolutely do that here in this one. He's going to make my player pool. He's not going to be like a core play, but he's going to make my player pool. At the running back position, Woody Marks is the workhorse running back for USC. Y'all, this slate has a ton of non-committee backfields, and I love that. It really kind of lessens the amount of variables, and you really do get to just pick and choose based off matchup as opposed to based off volume and recent performance. And so it really does help to me that this slate has a lot of guys who are very clearly the leader in their backfield. Anyway, Woody Marks is one of those guys. He sees a ton of usage in the passing game, also averaging about 4 catches per game. He's pretty good. And Washington's run defense, in my opinion, is weaker than their pass defense. Their pass defense is one of the nation's best. I believe they were in the top 5 in passing yards per game last time I looked. I think that Woody Marks has a chance to have a really big game against this team. At the wide receiver position for USC, Jacoby Lane is the highest priced guy because of his big game against Wisconsin and the way the DraftKings algorithm works. But the guy that you want, in my opinion, is Mekhi Lemon. He is not necessarily a full-time player still yet, but he is a guy that when he's on the field, they give him the football. Against Rutgers, he had 7 targets, caught 4 of them for 134 yards and a touchdown. Against Maryland, 8 catches, 89 yards. Against Penn State, 6 catches, 73 yards. He's still underpriced for what his current role on this offense is. If you're playing Miller or Moss, you absolutely have to stack him with Mekhi Lemon, and I think I'm going to be getting to Lemon as a one-off play as well. Do not discount Deuce Robinson, who's kind of like a wide receiver tight end hybrid who is playing a ton of snaps. Zachariah Branch is a big play waiting to happen, and we're still waiting on it to happen because he just hasn't had any this year. To me, he's a little overpriced based off what he's done this season, but hey, he's lightning in a bottle, and it wouldn't shock me to see him have a 75-yard touchdown in this one. On the Washington side, USC's defense is not great, y'all. Will Rogers, he hasn't been great this season. I've been highly critical of playing him in DraftKings. I've been fading him most of the time, and it's worked out most of the time. But now he's $5,400, implied to score 28 points against this defense. I don't think it's a bad spot for him. However, I think it's a smash spot for their running back, Jonah Coleman. So Jonah Coleman is actually one of the top running backs in the FBS in terms of rushing yards after contact per rush. The leader, believe it or not, is Ashton Genty. But Jonah Coleman is one of the best in that category. And the problem is that a lot of his yards after contact are occurring like way back because he's getting contacted not very far up. His offensive line is not generating a push. This USC defensive line, though, is very bad. We've seen Big Ten running backs run all over them this season. Jonah Coleman, with his running style and his ability to break tackles, has a chance for a monster game in this one against this USC front seven that is not good. And I really like his chances to have a big game. Salary $5,900. I think he's one of my favorite running back plays of the slate. At the wide receiver position, Washington is pretty centralized. Denzel Boston has been their wide receiver one through most of the season. However, in the last 2 games, we have seen Giles Jackson take a little bit more of a role, but they're both going to play all the snaps. They're both going to get targets. If you're playing Will Rogers, you can stack him with one or both of them. Will Rogers has very minimal rushing upside, so I think stacking both is not a bad idea. They're pretty cheap. I think if you're playing on the USC side, you can use one of them or use Jonah Coleman as a run back. Jeremiah Hunter still plays a lot of the snaps, but he just isn't seeing the same target load that Boston and Jackson are. And then you've got Kaleki Latu, the tight end, who is playing a lot of snaps, but just it is really a touchdown or bust play. But this is a game that I think you can definitely play a lot of pieces of with that game total of 58.5. Next up, we've got Kentucky heading to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. Tennessee is 17.5-point favorites with the game total 46.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 32-15 in favor of the Volunteers. On the Kentucky side, Brock Vandegrift, Georgia transfer, is still the starter. He has not given us a daily fantasy value-worthy performance since week 1 against Southern Miss. I'm going to continue fading him. Tennessee's a really good defense. Chip Trayanum, Kentucky's running back, finally played against Florida. Now he's out again. Demi Sumo Karnby is back. He's going to be their workhorse running back. But Tennessee's a really good defense. So even though he's going to be the guy, I have no desire to play him going up against that defense. The wide receiver position, I do think that you can play Dane Key and Barryon Brown. They both see very consistent volume. Key sees more volume than Brown. Key had 9 targets last week against Auburn, caught 4 of them for 87 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but it would have been a really good performance if he did. Barryon Brown sees less targets than Key, but he gets design touches. They will use him on jet sweeps. They will use him on screens. He is a lethal punt returner. He is a big play waiting to happen. I don't mind getting to either of those 2 guys, and those are probably the only pieces against Kentucky that I'm considering, just because there's a chance that I could see Key having like a 7 for 70 game. There's chances I could see Brown having a 65-yard touchdown. Like I can talk myself into both those plays. I can't talk myself into Vandegrift or Demi Sumo Karnby. On the Tennessee side, Nico Iamaleava, his price tag has dropped significantly since the start of the season. And if you look at the numbers, Tennessee is still operating at one of the fastest tempos in the nation in terms of how quickly they get snaps off. So it would stand to reason that he's getting a ton of passing volume, but he's not, because they have one of the highest rush rates in the nation. He's just not attempting a lot of passes. Now, the good news for Nico is that some of those rushes are his. He's ran for 8 carries in at least 8 carries in the last 4 games, but it hasn't turned into any kind of fantasy success. He is in a great system to have fantasy success. He's just not having it yet, and I'm probably going to pass in this spot against Kentucky. The guy that I will play is Dylan Sampson, who is seeing the benefit of that super high rush rate. He has been over 27 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. He has seen 22 carries or more in all of the last 4 games. He's a great option. He's $8,900. Great play on this slate. We just saw Jarquez Hunter tear up Kentucky for 43 fantasy points. So this is a good matchup for running backs. Dylan Sampson will see a ton of carries. Great play. I am willing to buy Squirrel White too. Against Bama, he left early with an injury, but we saw his volume starting to go up more and more. It's really easy to get him the football because you can get him the ball with these design touches. You can target him in the short and intermediate routes. $3,700 for a guy who plays all of the snaps. I kind of like Spur White. And I think you could talk yourself into Chris Brazell, who's actually been the most targeted Tennessee receiver all season long. Then you could talk yourself into Brew McCoy, who is still an every game starter, every down starter. Had 14 fantasy points against Bama. And I think you can talk yourself into Dante Thornton, who is a big play waiting to happen, who I believe is the third guy that I've said that about on this slate. I think you can talk yourself into playing these wide receivers as one-offs, but I'm probably not going to get to Nico as a full stack. Next up, we have got TCU heading to Waco, home of Chip and Joanna Gaines, which I only know because my wife likes Chip and Joanna Gaines. And basically, Baylor is 3-point favorites in this game with a game total of 63.5 points. And that is the highest game total on the slate. The implied total is about 33-30 in favor of the Bears. On the TCU side, they've got Josh Hoover at quarterback. And last week, we were big fans of Josh Hoover at the Texas Tech game. Didn't disappoint, didn't win us a GPP or anything, but 25 fantasy points is pretty solid. He got to his 300 yards, got 3 touchdowns, and that's the type of performance you're looking for Josh Hoover, right? He absolutely could hit at this price tag. I could see this game turning into an absolute shootout. I could see Hoover accounting for 3-4 touchdowns. I think he's a pretty good play at $8,300. TCU is not running the ball very often at all. They have one of the highest pass rates in the country. And Cam Cook, their previous workhorse running back, is being phased out. He only had 1 carry in the Texas Tech game. Trent Battle is being phased in. He only had 7 carries in that Texas Tech game. I'm not targeting either of these 2 running backs. Big reason why is because Savion Williams kind of turned into the RB1 for Texas Tech. They experimented with it a little bit against Utah by giving him 7 carries. Then they gave him 11 at Texas Tech. He scored a rushing touchdown. He scored a receiving touchdown. He was targeted 4 total times. He's a do-it-all player now, and he's only $5,500. I think no matter what your exposure to this game is, whether you want to play Josh Hoover, if you're playing Baylor guys on the other side, I think Savion Williams makes a lot of sense as a piece to get to. Jack Beck is still a great option at the wide receiver position. He's been a little underwhelming lately, but we know the big performances are there, and I'm not discounting that. I still think that he's a great option, and he's just getting to be a lower price tag at $7,500. Eric McAllister, the Boise State transfer, caught an 84-yard bomb against Texas Tech. It kind of saved his day. If he does that again, he'll hit value. If he doesn't, he won't. J.P. Richardson is a slot guy for them that gets a lot of consistent volume, but it's not like great volume. He very rarely scores a touchdown. He hasn't scored all season, in fact. And he very rarely gets targeted down the field. But $3,500 for a near every down player who is due for some touchdown regression, I don't mind J.P. Richardson as a stacking partner. But like I said, the most likely guy I am to play on TCU is Savion Williams with his new dual threat role in this offense. On the Baylor side, Skylar Robertson is the starter, and they finally have him appropriately priced. Like they just, they had been keeping him super low all season long. Now he's up at $7,700. This is where he should be. He is a dual threat. He had 73 rushing yards and a touchdown against Oklahoma State. With Baylor implied to score 33 points, you better believe that Skylar Robertson is a pretty solid play on this slate. At the running back spot, they are starting to really condense it around Bryson Washington as well at the running back position. I kind of like him as a play at $5,200. I think there's worse plays out there. You're starting to see Pendergrass, even though Pendergrass did have a lot of success against Oklahoma State. You're starting to see his workload decrease. Richard Reese starting to see his workload kind of plateau as well. Washington is the guy at $5,200. I think he's very reasonable to play. You will see Pendergrass and Reese get snaps, but I don't think they're going to get enough snaps to be viable in DFS. At the wide receiver position, Hal Presley was the guy that everybody played against Oklahoma State, and he saved his day, which was a stressful day because he was apparently not warming up, and then he was warming up, and then he wasn't on the starting lineup, and there was all this drama on whether he was playing, whether he was not. He comes in the second half and catches a 53-yard touchdown, and it saves everybody's day that played him, right? I'm sorry, I'm a game ahead. The Texas Tech game was when he had all that drama. He came in and catch a 35-yard touchdown, and that saved his day for everybody to play. But Oklahoma State, he played the full game, only caught 2 passes for 65 yards and a touchdown. He was not used with the regularness that he was against BYU and Iowa State, but he is still playing a decent amount of snaps. $3,500 is not a bad look for Hal Presley. The guy who has been more productive in the last two games, though, well, really just the game against Texas Tech, was Josh Cameron. He got 3 targets in the Oklahoma State game, only 2.3 fantasy points in that game, but he's starting to be kind of your more regularly used wide receiver. Ashton Hawkins also plays quite a bit. He was the most successful wide receiver against Oklahoma State, 4 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. So really with this Baylor team, it's kind of like wide receiver roulette. You don't really know who's going to go off, but you do know it's going to be one of Cameron, Hawkins, or Presley. So I don't think that that's a bad look to target these guys when you know it's going to be one of those 3 and they're all 3 cheap. I don't think that that's a bad option. Next up, last game of the night, we've got Pitt heading to Dallas to take on SMU. SMU is 7.5-point favorites with a game total of 57.5 points, which is one of the Slate's higher totals. The implied total is about 33-25 in favor of SMU. Sorry, y'all. It's getting late here on the East Coast. I have to say, it's kind of disrespectful to Pitt to have them as that big underdogs as a ranked opponent heading to SMU. It's interesting. It means that the Vegas clearly doesn't think very highly of Pitt. For Pitt, this is one of the better defenses that they've seen recently. Pitt has really whooped up on a lot of the bad defenses that they have played. Eli Holstein, he was outstanding at the start of the season. He was running the ball a lot more at the start of the season. He was having a lot more success. Last 2 games against Cal and Syracuse, 17 total DraftKings points. He's probably going to be a pass for me on this slate. Desmond Reed has been one of my favorite running back plays all season long. He had the dud game against Syracuse, but it was really just because they had 3 pick sixes. Pitt did. They're not going to have that against SMU. So if the offense can kind of get going and get back to their rhythm, I do think Desmond Reed's a decent play. But like I said at the top, I think Cam Scadaboo is the best running back play on the slate. I would rather save the $900 and play him than pay up to Desmond Reed. But I think a lot of people are going to do that as well. So I think Desmond Reed's going to be pretty lowly owned at 9,800. And obviously he has a ton of upside. So I don't think that he's an awful option in that regard. At the wide receiver position, it's kind of been wide receiver roulette for Pitt. Motefield is their best receiver. Just period. I've watched Pitt play. He's their best guy. But it was a victim of the offense not able to get anything going against Syracuse because they didn't have to get anything going because they were scoring defensively. To me, he's the best receiver to play on DraftKings. Raphael Williams is going to play a ton of snaps. He scored a touchdown against Syracuse. Kenny Johnson plays a lot of snaps as well. He's not a bad option. But Mumpfield will be the guy I would want, but I'm probably going to just not dabble in that and just play Pitt through Desmond Reed. On the SMU side, Kevin Jennings remains too cheap. Since he's been the starter, he has not had a game under 18 DraftKings points, which is about 3 times value for his salary of $6,100. So I'm going to continue playing him. He's probably going to be pretty chalky on this slate with SMU having a team total of 33 and him being only 6,100. I don't care. I think he's a great option. And I don't think you have to stack him because SMU features a nasty rotation of all their skill position players. Brashad Smith he was back to being the workhorse running back against Duke. He had 26 carries in that game, scored 2 touchdowns. If he's able to be the workhorse against Pitt, he could have a good day. But just this team, I have a hard time trusting their skill position players, especially when they get expensive. At the wide receiver spot, it's just this rotation, man. They just play a ton of guys. Jordan Hudson is technically their best receiver. He's their most talented receiver. I've watched them enough to make that statement. Jake Bailey plays a lot as well. He's currently questionable. RJ Maryland was their best receiving option from the tight end position, but he is now out. Derek McFall was taking snaps at running back at the start of the year. Hasn't done so in a while. Roderick Daniels is the guy I have the most interest in. He was seeing a lot of carries at the running back position, 15, 6, and 10 in his previous 3 games before the Duke game. In that Duke game, he only got 1 carry, but also in that Duke game, he did catch 2 bombs, one that went 81 yards, one that went 72 yards. And so if he's going to catch 2 bombs and one of them's going to be a touchdown, obviously it's going to pay for his salary. So I don't mind targeting him at $3,700. You've got Keyshawn Smith right below him, who is playing more and more, is seeing a lot of the work at the wide receiver spot. But I have such a tough time trusting skill position players on this team. Roderick Daniels is the one that I would go with because of his role as both a pass catcher and a runner and his price tag of only $3,700. If you miss out on him at $3,700, it doesn't handicap your lineup the same way as if you miss out on Brashad Smith and you pay $7,700 for a dud. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. Hopefully, we gave you guys plenty of information to build some winning DFS lineups here for this Saturday night slate. Hopefully, we're able to help you guys out. If this video does help you out, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. I cannot stress that enough, and I appreciate it so much when you guys do that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That we can be with us for the rest of the college football season. We are closing in on 800 subscribers, which means that we're getting closer and closer to 1,000. So help me get to my goal by hitting that subscribe button, and you can be with us for the rest of the college football season and the college basketball season. Remember, if you want more from me, follow me on Twitter, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, go to the Patreon for the core plays. That's going to do it for this episode, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here because I'm getting exhausted. I'm tired. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thank you guys for watching the lens to this point. Best of luck to you guys on the Saturday night slate, and I will see you guys next time.